Good day, good morning for me, good afternoon for you. My name is Max. I'm a senior lecturer in film and TV at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm a smartphone filmmaker, and I produce cinematic VR projects, done a few transmedia storytelling projects, and that's what I'd like to share with you today. I'm really excited to be part of Games for Change Latin America. And my topic for today is really mobile cinematic VR. As I'm coming to you virtually from Australia, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. On behalf of those present, I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet now, virtually. And I'm coming to you online. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia and hope that the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. And so when I say mobile cinematic VR, you might know VR, of course, as most people do. And you might also think about cinematic VR, because that means then we're referring to very much 360 videos, and we think about the work that lots of people have been doing in the space. But I think everyone brings something to the space of VR at the moment, because it's such a new form still. And what I would like to think about today is very much the space of mobile and smartphone filmmaking, and how some of these early mobile and smartphone films developed a very particular aesthetic and had a very particular look and feel to it, and that these things still resonate in cinematic VR. And so cinematic VR, of course, I mean a 360 video production working with omnidirectional video cameras. And yeah, so as you can see here on my slides, there is a few things which I think are really sort of exciting about mobile cinematic VR. Is that it's, of course, with filming. We work with some omnidirectional video cameras, and most of these cinematic VR cameras are controlled by your smartphone. So when you set up the camera and when you start the filming process, you would be in the screen, of course. So what you do is you go and hide somewhere, and that way you can just press the start button on your camera. But of course, smartphones are also part of the dissemination or exhibition format of cinematic VR works. And I think, the Google Cardboards have been around for some time now. Not everyone likes them, but I think as an entry level to a VR experience, they're great. It's like $5 and you get like a VR headset in your hand. If you get a bit more, you can, upgrade and you go always higher, but, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to work with us. And I think if there's a medium that is so new and we're still experimenting, why not try with the most accessible tools first before we jump into, more high-end things. And of course, they can be branded very nicely as well. So that means you can get them out to people and continue this engagement. And yeah, so you can see there's some pictures of me, like quite a few years ago, making mobile phone films, and now on location working with cinematic VR. And of course, the workflows I think are also really interesting, because you can sort of try out still different routes to sort of get to your end result. And also as a filmmaker, I've produced 2 feature-length smartphone films, 3 transmedia projects, and a dozen short films, smartphone short films, so mobile and smartphone short films. And so, the picture in the middle there, you can see, when I first uploaded my first experiments to YouTube in 2006. And since then, I believe that the best camera is the one that you get in your pocket, which is the smartphone. And, if you think about all the other filmmakers that are out there in the sort of more established cinematic space, you've got people that have got lots and lots of credits. So, if I think about my favorite filmmakers historically as well as contemporary, so I don't know, Dziga Vertov was a big influence for me. He made 17 films and lots of newsreels. Chris Marker, who also sort of mentioned in my talk today, he produced 62 films, installations, multimedia videos, so about 130 projects in total. Some documentary filmmakers like Wim Wenders. He has 65 credits as director, 49 as producer, and counting. Or some, colleagues from New Zealand. I'm really enjoy the work from Annie Golson. She has 14 producer and 10 director credits, and again, she produces a film every year. So, but in the world of VR, we don't have that extensive amount of production credits. There's of course some pioneers. So Jessica Billard from the Google VR team, who produced like in 2015 the first VR project with the GoPro cameras. And she also made some interesting experimental films, the Deep Dream VR. And of course, there's Chris Milk. You know, you can't talk about cinematic VR without getting around him. He started in 2013 with Beck, the music with Sound and Vision. Then he launched VRverse in 2014, then Within. And he really pioneered this area of immersive entertainment. And in the world of journalism, there's of course Nonny de la Pena, who at 2012 brought to the Sundance Film Festival VR project. It wasn't cinematic VR, but it as a VR. And of course, since then at Sundance, you've seen at the New Frontier for quite some time, really massive VR projects being presented. And now we are moving, I think, slowly more into the space of XR, so extended reality, bringing virtual reality and augmented reality together. But I think it is still quite key to understand what mobile cinematic VR can bring to the space. And especially if you're thinking about XR, which will mean there's more content either produced or disseminated on mobile devices, the space will just be I think a more interesting space to watch. I think in Australia, one of I think my favorite VR producers is Lynette Woolworth. She produced Collisions in 2017, a fantastic VR film, and then I've seen Avana at ACMI, the Australian Centre for Moving of Image, in 2018, which was really an installation VR piece. And I think that is the way I think where VR can really we can experience VR to its full potential. So I'll talk a little bit about this as well. But what I would like to do as well is I would like to think a bit about now that I'm presenting to Sao Paulo at the the Games for Change, Latin America. I really thought also to mention when I presented my first mobile film. So you can see the picture there again. Max was a Kaitai, and I produced my mobile-mentary work at the Museum de la Image et Son, so the Museum of Moving Image, at the Mobile Fest in 2008. And I think really the Mobile Fest started to have a conversation. We started to have a conversation, especially the Mobile Fest, for quite some years, to talk about how can mobile technology contribute to democracy, culture, art, ecology, peace, education, and the third sector. And it was just one of my favorite festivals. Sao Paulo, definitely one of my favorite cities. So being online with you is pretty good, but I would definitely prefer to be in Sao Paulo. And it was just an amazing experience. And I think some of these conversations that started at that time, at that festival, we resonated in the online space. And I think that's something I want to mention as well today. Yes. Paulo, would you like to join in at this point?
Yes, for sure. Yes, I think it's really important to mention the way we met. It was during the Mindplay conference in London Metropolitan University, and that nicely connects with Games for Change, because I remember that the whole theme of that festival was play, right? And that's all about regarding games, and in Games for Change view is playing for change in a way. So that's really nice, and also connects, of course, with Mobile Fest. When we met, I was presenting a poster back then, and I remember you got in touch. Oh, you are Paulo Hartmann from Mobile Fest, and I said yes. so that's how we started our collaboration, and it's really, I completely agree with you that presential events are more warm, minimum to say, but that's what we have nowadays in the pandemic times. So and it's interesting to reconnect in this whole moment that you were launching a VR movie that I'm pretty sure that we'll discuss. We'll present, talk a bit about later on. and I am doing the soundtrack alongside with a colleague of mine, André Namour. We together developed the RNA Studio that we are going to talk about this tomorrow night. The RNA Studio. So I guess that's my intervention.
Well, I think the other thing I really wanted to mention, so like, there was a great panel presentation that happened at the Museum for Moving Image, and it was for us, it wasn't a question that at that point mobile filmmaking would become bigger and it would like become mainstream. And we were talking about this, and I think now you can see with Steven Soderbergh producing Unsane 2 years ago. There was a Hollywood blockbuster produced on the iPhone, and for us this was like, yeah, it would happen. It was like it was just a question of time. And I think some of the discussions that we established at that point, they're still resonating now in the space. And so, as always, when we think about something that is so new and innovative, we don't have to like start from zero. We can think about what was established in the space and what we learned from these early experiments. Of course, the other smartphone film, which was like, I think, really fantastic to see, was Tangerine by Jerome Baker, that made lots of reviews. But yeah, I've been to the Berlinale the last 2 years, and every year there were at least 2 or 3 smartphone-produced documentaries that now receive funding from National Geographic, from Arte. And these are films that couldn't have been produced with a major broadcasting camera because they worked in a very different storytelling way. So they were either co-produced, collaborative, they were engaging the communities, so like, selfie style. And so I think lots of these conversations and lots of the things that were exhibited at the Mobile Fest, they are really an inspirational element for when we talk about transmedia storytelling now. And yeah, it was really great. I think like there's nothing that substitutes. I think this year has been crazy for everyone. Like we just in Melbourne, we had 111 days of lockdown, and we are emerging out of this slowly. So I can go back into the classroom now and teach with all the COVID safe guidelines. But we were having 1 semester teaching entirely online, and of course it was a very different experience. And I think the same for like making things possible. It always works, but I think the great thing is like you meet at the conference. So like when Paolo was in London, we met at that conference and started to have a discussion, and then there's the opportunity to go to Brazil for the Mobile Fest and work with other like-minded people for I think it was 3 or 4 days, having some panel discussions, having workshops, and also like be part of the exhibitions and meet international creatives, artists, filmmakers, designers that were really passionate about mobile technologies. Was really like, I think, a key thing. And I started a project in London as part of my PhD, which was called Film Mobile. And I was so inspired by the Mobile Fest and that sort of creativity that it brought, that we wanted to sort of continue. And of course, in London, I worked with some colleagues of mine who were part of the sort of Film Mobile that presented, and there were some colleagues from Brazil as well. Daniel Florencio is a really great filmmaker, and so yes. I thought, why don't we start to have a conversation online again? And I think I see some festivals that go like, oh yeah, we are online for the first time this year. This is so innovative, and I'm like, yes. We have been trying all the different things, and I did my PhD at the University of Westminster. So I think there was like at that time a very new conferencing system with a special IP, and we used this, and it was normally only reserved for the executive leadership team, but they had it, and so they were like very happy that other people shared it. And I think at that time you were part of the British Council. They had also one, and so there was like a really great way to connect. But we also did some other events. I put some links in there if you're interested, where we just sort of used as in Google Hangout or Skype at that time to really like get a group of people in Sao Paulo together and a group of people in London and have this dialogue about this is what we are doing, what is happening, on the other side of the world, so to say. And I think that is just really inspirational to see what people are producing. And of course, it's part of the fun to jumping through all these technical loops and the things that can come up in these events. But I think now with the lockdown, we are really forced to like embrace that space a lot more. I don't personally see that as like substituting anything, but like once there was a discussion at the Mobile Fest, and then there was also an exchange of different artists. So there were some, when we had the Mobile Fest London presented by Film Mobile, there was actually some artists from Kasia Molga, a really fantastic interactive artist. At that time, she was in Sao Paulo, Brazil for residency. So we had this really great connection from artists who are from the UK, being in Sao Paulo, and you know, having Brazilian filmmakers in London. So have this really like this international conversation on where do we think this technology is going, how creativity really makes things possible, what are the limitations, but how can we, like, you know, push the boundaries. And I think
exactly. And that was even before the smartphone launching, right? It was I remember the whole infrastructure that Marcelo and I created alongside with SESC to do the proper video conference was, you know, enormous. Like you said, corporate technology, you know, really dedicate internet links. It was really expensive back those days, but nowadays it's trivial. You know, you can do via your mobile phone. So and you can do loads of things, especially VR, with your mobile phone as well, right? Your mobile phone is a VR headset, a minimum setup at least.
And I think the other interesting thing was sort of like, maybe the now's the right point to mention, is I think that we can see a lot of the mobile phone filmmakers that produced mobile phone films moved into the VR space. So a filmmaker from France who was producing the smart mobile phone feature film God in My Pocket set up a company, Wonder VR, and I think he's the CEO, producing those cinematic VR projects. A colleague, Miriam Ross in New Zealand, is who has, like, she produced the Vertical Video Manifesto, and now she's producing some really great cinematic VR or interactive VR projects. And so I think you can see a few people that explored the boundaries of the mobile technology. They're really pushing the envelope and see what can we do even with, you know, mobile devices to create the media projects, to create cinematic projects, that they are now, of course, embracing the same space of VR, because we understand what it means to experiment, and we've been like trying to like also sometimes go alternative pathways to what maybe the industry is doing. I think that is also one of the things to really define innovation, because what is innovation? Innovation means to do something in an original way, or you want to say in a new way, but you can also think about alternative ways. And I think the way innovation really works is when you can think about what you produced and compare this to like-minded colleagues, people, for inspiration, but also for understanding what you managed to introduce. Because I think for mobile and smartphone filmmaking for a long time, the difficult thing was that it was compared to traditional Hollywood blockbuster in a way, or it was compared to what you produce with a red camera. And sort of my argument is, no. It needs to be a space only about mobile and smartphone filmmaking. And I think, or like what the Mobile Fest did, is sort of like, you know, even beyonding the creative area and thinking about the third sector, health, and all these things that we are now seeing happening. And I think, yeah, please jump in.
Yeah. So that's also, you know, the way that games in the Games for Change, the way of the pitfalls that are proposed in the Game for Change. You have for Black lives, you have for animals, for pets, pet rights. You have loads of environment, you know, cities. So yes, that's. I mean, to my perspective, that was something that I was really deep into back those days, starting with my research during Mobile Fest. Was a transdisciplinary way of analyzing, you know, subjects. So, and I guess that this is getting more and more common, hopefully nowadays. Yes, that's my perception.
Yes, completely. I think that's also. I'm very excited to be at the you know, Games for Change conference, because I think as transmedia has showed us, we don't need to think about this as like, this is games and this is cinematic. I think these sort of things have, you know, converged, the big word, so to say, which, you know, has been around for some time. But I think that shows a lot. What we are now learning is that the industry is really shifting towards real-time filmmakers that work with game engines. So that means we are working with cinematic approaches in a games technology. But at the same time, if you're part of the games environment and you know all the technology, I think it's very useful to understand the perspective of a cinematographer. And if you bring these two perspectives together, that's I think where the sweet spot is for games, or also for like the cinema industry. I think then adding the idea of the most accessible element to it, which is at that point in time, the most democratic camera that I can think of, the most accessible dissemination form is the smartphone. And so I think that allows for lots of experimentation, and that allows them also to really understand what we are producing.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Max. So I'll leave you so you can proceed with your presentation. Is that okay?
Yes, fantastic.
Okay.
So really excited to reconnect in that sense with some fellow mobile creatives. But also I think so much changed in the industry and the whole ecosystem. So this was one project where Nokia, after I've been trying to touch base with them for such a long time, where they went to me, it's like, Max, we need you to produce lots of mobile phone films for the Pangea Day in London. And they were like, produce like, I think 5 short films. They're like, oh, we need more, and we need them tomorrow. And I was like, okay, what can I do? So was back then teaching as well. So I said, well, I continue producing I think it was like 5 films a day, but like, let's involve my students too, because then we can produce 25 a day. And most people didn't realize that the N6680 at that time already had a short video editing functionality, like a mini software that was pre-installed. And of course, Nokia had this thing which was called the Ovi store, where you could upload, which is like a YouTube thing, where you could upload your films to. And so I guess Nokia tried to do everything in them, as a company, and that probably, which wasn't the sort of thing that, that really was the way that computing at that time was going, because Apple and iOS, they were not leading the space of smartphone filmmaking. That really changed with the iPhone 4S that brought 1080p, and then all the journalists jumped onto it, and the vloggers jumped onto it, and sort of more traditional filmmakers jumped onto it, because that was then the industry standard of 1080p. That meant a very straightforward distribution. And so if we just think about the ecology that was part of that mobile filmmaking, or nowadays, which is smartphone filmmaking, we have to consider the apps. Like most people will use Filmic Pro for editing. You use Adobe Rush or LumaFusion for editing on your iOS, on your iPad, or on your tablet. And of course, then you upload it to whatever platform you choose. So whether it's YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, and this is part of the ecology. And I think that's where the colleagues from Finland sort of tried to, I think, got that business model probably not sorted right, because they're very good cameras, had Carl Zeiss Jena lenses. The most smartphone filmmakers use these Nokia phones because you would be able to produce some interesting work with it. So my point here is, it's not only about the device that you are using, but how it connects into the eco-structure. And I think there's a lot of things that games has done in a really interesting way, what I'm looking at, that the filmic space can learn from. So when it comes to crowdfunding, when it comes to feedback, and I think the film world uses this waterfall methodology, that you produce a film, you complete it, and then you launch it to the world. But in games, you've got lots more input from the audiences, gamers, users at a very early stage. And I think that is what I can see now happening in the transmedia space as well. But I just really want to talk very briefly about the film Max with the Kai Tai, because that was the one that I showed in Sao Paulo in the Museum of Moving Image. You can see it was in 2006 shot on one of these Nokia phones, and also, as you can see there in the picture, I used a Japanese phone because I was like, really high end at that point. And the exciting thing for me was that the mobile images would look very different, and that was something for me that I wouldn't try to get rid of the artifact, but I fully embraced the artifact. And of course, I would use an experimental approach to editing, and I would use very much montage series to really work with the conceptual ideas of movement, color, and then of course also working with doing some field recordings, and then working with different audio artists to produce some audiovisual experiences. And you can see like also experiment a lot with different aspect ratios, with different frame elements in the actual composition. But the key thing for me was, which resonated in that work, but also what I could see through Film Mobile when I exhibited and curated short film screenings, and I think it was the world's first feature film screening of at the Lumiere Cinema in London, which happens to be where the Lumiere Cinematograph was presented, and then we presented 3 mobile smartphone feature films, which was that there was this, and I think the work as well that was seen at the Mobile Fest, we're looking at the different projects that were shown there, that in this mobile aesthetic, which was looking quite different, there's a few things that are very particular about it. One, it's the experience of location. If you're filming with and this still resonates even if you're filming with an, iPhone or with a Samsung or whatever, phone you're using, you normally don't have a big lens. I mean, nowadays there's DFO adapters and people mount all kinds of lenses on their smartphones, which I'm not sure if this is smartphone filmmaking, but that's another conversation. You're so close to the subject that you could touch it, right? Or you're so close to the environment, because you normally put up your phone, it's handheld, or you put it on a tripod, or if you tape it to a light post, whatever, you have to be close to the environment, because you don't have that big zoom lens that you can zoom into where things are happening. So you have to be where the action is. And that means you reference the location. And that experience of being in that location is something that is transmitted. Of course, the other thing is that in this process, it's a very immediate response. Like I said before, platforms, video live streaming. And I think if you look at China, that really shows us how video live streaming, or what I'm doing now as well as, is one of the things that we will see happening more and more. But of course, as well as like what you can see there in the picture is what lots of creatives, I know lots of people are doing, is this sort of idea of, yeah, well, you show yourself as part of, it's a personal film, it's something that is about my story, and that of course makes it most authentic, because you share with your viewers, if you want to call them audiences, part of your experience. And so this intimate quality still resonates, I think, in mobile cinematic VR. The experience of location, the personal, the immediate and intimate quality. What happened in the early smartphone filmmaking, we can now also see in mobile cinematic VR projects. And I see all these YouTube videos all the time. Someone says like, "Oh, I just edited a film on my iPad." I'm like, "Yeah, great." There were some other apps around before. So and that was something that I played with some Splice and iMachine to make some music in a project that was called Midtown. And for me, the idea, if I think here about immersive media, it means that we are engaged into something. And when we've got the capacity to edit on location rather than doing the filming on location and then sending the files to someone else, or editing, putting the files on a hard disk and then going back to your studio and you sit in a dark room and a couple of weeks later you edit the material. I think that's a very different idea than when you're actually on location and you do the editing on location. Because you're still immersed by the sounds of the location. You're still immersed, in that case, the lights of Times Square. And so that was like the exploration of this project Midtown, which I edited while I was filming on Times Square and while I was also editing while I was, in Times Square or driving around Times Square with a car. And that, of course, also separates this idea of pre-production and post-production, something that is just, all in one experience. And I think, again, the Kaitai aesthetic, which in an article with some great colleagues who also at the Mobile Fest, Camille Baker and Kasia Molgo, we sort of defined this. And we said, the aesthetic emphasizes the importance of location, space, and also the non-space, being there, being anywhere. But here is where the phone is and not in a fixed place via immersion. The individual experience of space or state of being is located within their own bodies. This is expressed as an haptic aesthetic rooted in the embodied affectivity manifested through gesture and movement of the device while documenting, videoing in it performativity or movement. which is afforded by the phones themselves. And again, we can learn quite a lot from these ideas when we think about cinematic VR. And that's what I'll come to in a second. I just really wanted to mention as well another project, another feature film that I worked on, feature documentary, which is called Frankenstorm. And I produced this while I was at visiting research fellow at Monmouth University. And the idea with this one was very much to think about how we can use smartphones as well to co-create stories, and how to use a smartphone, in this case, for instance, for location scouting. So it's thinking about all the apps that there are beyond filming. And so when I arrived at Monmouth, it was just 5 months after the Frankenstorm hit the Jersey Shore. And I was, you're jet lagged, so what you do is like you try to sleep, you can't sleep. I went for a run on the coastline, and there were all these semi-permanent demolitions and sites of people just compiling wood, and like you would see sort of houses still being demolished, and I was like, oh my god, this is like, you had seen it in the news, but then 4 or 5 months later, the news moves away because there's other things to cover, but these things were still there. And I was talking with the students, and everyone, of course, was still sharing their experiences and talking about this. And so I talked to Anna Massoni, who was at that time the chair of photography at Monmouth University. I said, I just really have to make a project about this now. And Anna Massoni, who's now the director of the Institute of Photography in New York, she's like, I'll pick you up tomorrow. And I'm like, okay. So, like, then let's do it. But how do I get my locations? He's like, oh, we will find something. I'm like, yeah, but I thought that wouldn't be a good way to start making a film. So I said, why don't we share through your students that I did a workshop, the sort of the next week, is why don't we share this app which we created at that time was through an open through there's a Kiwi developer that lived in New York, and he developed a platform that allowed was very much like a mini Instagram. So it's like like Instagram launched in 2010. So there was like lots of new ways to explore how you can create these photo communities. And it was actually called Snapper, that platform, and you could sort of develop your own sort of Instagram interface. And we shared that through Facebook with some of the students. And I did my first driving, my first filming. We went back again the next week, but when I went on the second week, I had all the locations sussed out. But not only that, I knew where to go. I also, like, with a sort of star rating system and some likes, the community told me where they thought would be the best places to go. So it was really much having a conversation with the community to ask them, where do you think I should go and do my filming? Whom do you think I should interview? And then of course, people shared different pictures where they lived. And of course, it's a very, it's a very, very long, it's a very big area to drive all across the Jersey Shore. And so that not only was like, yes, it was time saving that, within 1 week, the whole location scouting was completed. But I think more importantly, it really started to have a conversation with the community, that it wasn't like me as a filmmaker making a decision, but I had a dialogue and asking people where you think we should be doing the filming. And the film, I think it went to a few festivals, but I think I thought the most interesting observation for me was that it was shown in New Zealand, Aotearoa in Canterbury TV, so in Christchurch, where a few years ago the Canterbury earthquake happened, the Christchurch earthquake, and the film was shown a couple of times by demand of the community again. I think people could really relate to these stories. So do you have a yellow sticker that says you can't go to your house anymore because it is damaged by the hurricane, or do you have, like, I think it was a red sticker that means it's earthquake prone? And so I think it was about sharing this story about the community and how the community could come together to collectively overcome this difficult time, which of course was very inspiring for people that have been affected by that. And I got really excited about the idea of working with some collaborative projects. So I did a project that was called 24 Frames, 24 Hours. And then also with a colleague from Canada, Gerda Semmer, started Viewfinders. And the idea was really that we wanted to think about the easiest way, in a way, to to start collaborating is when you take your phone, and once you're in a moving object, you press play. And that was something that we then edited together through the YouTube video editor, which doesn't exist anymore, but I thought it was great to have an editor on a video platform. And we also had a dedicated website and then an AR experience. And that was just, I think, the most exciting thing about these things is that when you work with, I don't think that the term, first of all, user-generated content doesn't really work. So I call it peer-generated content or workshop-generated content to think about what happens when you work with your online peers, and that way you sort of, are part that you communicate with them, but also through video. And that was then of course, we also exhibited this project at festivals and at some museums. And so the idea was that when you go into a museum, you probably travel on, some kind of, a moving object. So whether it's a bus, a bike, or a plane, so you can be part of this project. Or if you didn't know about it, when you, return from the gallery, you can be part of this by collecting some footage. And it worked really great to create these magical moments of where we try to think about all the different modes of transport that there are, but then you get some new forms that people submit. And I think that's the beautiful thing, that you can't restrict these formats, but they're like in an open-ended approach to what is happening. And one of the creative explorations was really to work with an AR app. And so one of my master students, Philip Rubery, because I was looking at some platforms that could be used for this, and he was like, no, I code everything myself. And he's a really great interaction designer. And so we worked there with Google Cloud Vision API, Hammer.js, JavaScript, and then developed a prototype mobile AR app that would allow you to bring the cinema into the world, so to say. So once you are on location, you use the app, and it would then find on the database similar films that were submitted. And I think this way, again, you create some really magical connections through color and movement about different locations. And so, yeah, some of the videos that came out from this, I think, was really great. So here's a short trailer that was edited on the YouTube video editor, and it was just bringing together the different modes of transport. And so, when we conceptualized the project, I never thought about the ski lift, right? And so, Philip was a fantastic interface designer. He tried to design all the icons that you could think about. But of course, you would never think about a ski lift, or you wouldn't think about the next shot is a gondola in Venice. And I think that was part of that experience, to think about travel films, but how this can be really expanded in the digital realm. And of course, that's all about mobility, because the mobile phone is what we have got with us most of the times. And so, yeah, that's that shot. I think that was for me the moment where I knew this project worked in a really fantastic way, because you wouldn't think about these sort of projects, these sort of contributions to receive. And so it's really one of the things that through experimentation you learn a little bit more about how the mobile space works. And so I think that is something also that we can now take to the world of VR, because there's, I think, lots more different approaches to what VR can do. And so if you're interested, I've wrote a book chapter about this, which is called Mobile Cinematic VR, MCVR. It's in the Routledge Companion of Mobile Media Art. And it was very much thinking about what does VR mean in a mobile sense. And so there's been some interesting research that's been produced in the world of VR. So in a journal article, Vanishing Point, Spatial Composition and the Virtual Camera, Jones investigates presence as a unique VR experience by explaining it through a novel camera technique. In this VR logic, the camera no longer represents an authorial perspective. It doesn't communicate the story through this is what happened. Instead, it communicates it in the presence. This is what's happening. And I think that is very much what I tried to explain earlier, was the immediacy of that location experience in mobile filmmaking. So presence, again, is a key thing that we could see in mobile phone filmmaking, but it's also resonating in cinematic VR. And there's some work that I found really inspiring, thinking about conceptual ideas of editing by Dennis Tortum from the MIT VR Symposium, where he talked, which is being virtually there, where he talked about embodied montage. So he thought about that when you are in a VR environment, the idea of looking is very much similar to editing. And so, again, that embodiment is something that, resonated in the early mobile aesthetics, but I can see this also being quite key for mobile cinematic VR. And so that really sort of was some of these projects that really led me towards thinking about, how can we work with mobile cinematic VR? And of course, if you just think about what happened in the last year, so in 2016, the first cameras, omnidirectional video cameras were put to the market, and I think it was Samsung who was really had the sort of first, what some people call consumer level, so pro-D user level of a cinematic VR camera. It's an omnidirectional video camera, and through a conversation with someone at Samsung, they actually told me that they first thought about it, and they had a video advertisement out, that they thought about this camera more as a live streaming camera. So that when you are with your family, you can put up the camera and live stream it, and you don't only what we're doing now, you see me just through the frame, but you can see the whole family in one place and the other family in the other place. But that somehow didn't take off, and then the Samsung 360 Gear was launched. It was so successful that they brought out the second one, and then lots of other companies jumped onto that sort of in that space. And in 2017, 2018, heaps and heaps, lots of different cameras came out. Of course, this year is not a year where you want to be on location anywhere. So, I think that all was a bit paused. But Insta360 Pro just launched a new camera, the One X2. So I think we can see that there is now, again, very mobile, very, the size of a smartphone cameras that have, some fantastic, capacities. And so I think the journey for me also about VR was really that I first got interested in this when I was working in Massey University in Wellington. My office was right next to a fab lab. And I mentioned before, there's the early 360 cameras. They had this idea of working with GoPro cameras. You'd have different GoPro cameras, 4 or 8 or 12. You put them into a laser printed rig, or you could buy a rig, and that way you would then stitch it all together and create a VR project. And on a Friday night, I was having a beer with one of the guys in the fab lab, and I was like, oh, wait, couldn't we do something like that with mobile phones? Because when you get together on a Friday evening with, let's say, a couple of people, everyone will have a smartphone. And he got so excited that he said, you have to come back next week, we'll do this. So we started experimenting. We bought some colleagues some beers and said, can I have your mobile phone for an hour, please? And so as a proof of concept, we printed that rig, and it wasn't smooth experience. The rendering took forever, but we managed to produce a equirectangular with a couple of different mobile devices. And that was really my journey into VR. So that I was like, oh, it works. Sorry. And the stitching, of course, also works with you can do the stitching with all different types of software. You can also work with After Effects. And I wouldn't really recommend to do it, but one of my students was really into stitching one of these days, and he sort of decided to do this all manually. As part of this project, I experimented with some open source applications, and it was very much the time when Nokia announced the Ozu camera, which of course I think was a great idea, but the back end and the technology was again, not thinking about the ecology, that you want something you just throw straight into Premiere. And so I was exploring some of these open softwares like Hugin, and it works, but it isn't really smooth. I think nowadays, of course, all the 360 cameras they come with some, stitching software, and so that of course works in in a very easy workflow production way. And of course, you can put all your 360 videos into Premiere Pro, or if you're on an iPad, you can even work with or like an iPhone. You can even work with LumaFusion and edit your work. I really love the Google Cardboard camera because you could take a 360 picture with sound. But Google is sort of disappearing again with a few things. But you can do Panos now, which is an easy way to get started. And of course, there is the whole area of broadcast VR. Yes, but I think when you start with something that is so new, like the resolution in most headsets isn't higher than 2K anyhow. So why do you film with 10K? If you compress everything down, and why do you buy a camera that's $35,000 if you're still like in the area of experimenting? So, and I think that was something that I found a bit odd, that I've been like going around the world for 10 years saying you don't need a great camera to make a great film, and so I could see some of these things happening in the VR world now, so I'm a bit like, yeah. But what is really VR for me? And I really think about VR as that film that you can see in La Jetée from Chris Marker, where you get the time traveler, and he's sort of reliving his memory. And La Jetée, I think, is really interesting because it's an maybe you can say an implosion. It merges past, present, and future into sort of one audiovisual experience, so to say. And it's a really imaginative space. And I think that is something that I've found for my project I'm working on for Memoryscapes as this sort of idea of that, you're working in a what is sort of like almost a present progressive. So something that is still happening, that is you're still experiencing, but it might have finished in the past, but you're still experiencing it at this point in time. Or like in La Jetée, you even look into the future. And so I think the notion of memory and thinking about more of imaginative experiences than thinking about VR only about a representational tool is really great. It's really like there's lots of scope for further explore where we can really push VR. So in terms of imaginative storytelling, I think one of the quotes from La Jetée is, "Nothing distinguishes memory from ordinary moments. It is only the later that they claim remembrance by their scars." And so I started to like experimenting, and I think it was really great to see that there is some festivals beyond the, let's say, major spaces. That like in Melbourne, there's a VR Fringe for independent VR producers. One of my films was at a Sydney-based SF3 Smartphone Flicks Festival in and so it was really like was really excited to have Mind Journey in the Sydney Opera House. And but I think that was like really fantastic also from the festival that they had a smartphone film festival in the Sydney Opera House, which I think was like being very bold about smartphone filmmaking on the big space, on the big screen in that fantastic space. At the same time, they embrace also the fantastic work by our colleagues in Sydney, Angela and her team, how they work with some smartphone filmmaking. And then the other project I produced was NeoCortex, because I really thought about VR also as an interactive project. And so again, like normally you probably work with a game engine, and I've had my try at Unity and Unreal, and but I came across this tool, Wonder VR. So they've now stopped Wonder VR Studio, and moving to Wonder VR Spaces, which is a bit more like an Mozilla Hubs experience. So I'm probably working next year more with a 3D Vista Tour. And that is mainly because I'm very keen to also use the same tools in my classroom so that I could, teach screen production students, film and TV students, and, in a couple of hours, an interactive cinematic VR experience. We might shift to Unity at some point, but I'd be more than happy to have some conversations with anyone at, Games for Change about this. And I think the great thing about, of course, the experience is then that you make these choices, and what Dennis Totem said, like, looking becomes editing. And so Wonder VR was really great because once you create a hotspot, just a little circle comes up, and you can then look at that circle. It means you can jump to another environment. And so for me, it was very much thinking about locations that would be very suitable for a sort of, cinematic VR experience. So there was like in Auckland, New Zealand, and sort of an old bunker that had like, multiple pathways. And it was just like the perfect site for an interactive VR experience. But I also became very interested in very abstract and very experimental exploration. So really creating experiences. And I think that's what I want to do now with Memoryscapes, is really to create dream spaces. So thinking about VR as an interface between what is our experience and what is the experience in a dream world. And but also think in the technical areas in the workflow. So this is at Swinburne University, my favorite spot that, I can't still be there all the time, but, we just through COVID safe protocols opening up, there we set up an HTC Vive working with Premiere Pro. So that means you can, press play, pause, and edit very much in a 360 environment, which I think is quite key because timing works in a very different way. The way that scale works is very different. And so when you edit on a 2D screen, that isn't really like the way that you would look into these preview experiences. So I think if there's a capacity and you've got an Oculus or HTC Vive, you can set it up with some any tethered device. You can set it up with Premiere Pro, and I think that makes the editing way more fun, and also in ways of testing the project that you're working on. I found one tool that I used for some productions, which is for the films that I created before. So for Memoryscapes and for Mind Journey and for Neocortex. And that was really for me to understand, ambisonics. But I'm very happy now to work with Paolo and his team and Andre to really have some experts that really understand ambisonics, because this tool, RealSpace 360 Cinema, works great because you can upload your 360 film, and you can upload then some WAV mono files, and then you can spatialize in a very easy way. But of course, if you're a sound producer and if you work with Logic, or if you work with Pro Tools or Reaper, you of course have some 360 Sound Studio plugins that you can really fully embrace that space. And it's more than just positioning the sound in these areas, but thinking about the sound that you replicate in smaller spaces or in bigger spaces, and how the sound travels through the environment. But conceptually thinking about light, color is something that you would look at if you're in a VR experience. And of course, if you sync that up with some sound coming from a different space, will enhance that experience in a very special way. And so, I think that's, the visuals do something very particular about the audio as well. And so I think that's then really great to have a collaboration to working with some sound producers. And in this process of thinking about and doing a bit more research about audio and sound, it reminded me of at the conference, at the Visible Evidence conference in 2008 in the UK, I met Richard Leacock. I think if you don't know the name, you probably know his films. So he's one of the key documentary filmmakers. He made some fantastic work where he filmed the JFK primary campaign. He filmed the first enrollment of an African-American student at the University of Alabama, and he was hanging out with some Robert Flaherty, Alan Pannenbecker, and Robert Drew. So he's in that film school and that scene. And in his biography, he talked about the way that he would create these documentary films as the feeling of being there. So it's as close as you can get to this experience. And I think that is something that I can see is very important for VR, because you're not there, you're imagining in a way to be there. And I think it is about that experience which you have, which is a feeling. So, but why also Richie, as I call him, Richard Leacock, is so important, I think, in this area, is because he was one of the first, lightweight, portable 60mm filmmakers, and he was very much thinking about sync sound. And he said, I need a camera that could be handheld, that would run on battery power, And he was like thinking about filming an orchestra with 2 or 3 cameras, all in sync sound, with a high quality recorder and all mobile. And so that was something that he did in his films. So like, you know, sort of at that time, you know, removing it from the rigid of a tripod and the sort of that filmmaking style was a, you know, authoritative, you know, approach to the voice of God, but having a mobile exploration. And one of his film, you know, prolific. He was like, you know, 68 years old and still producing films. And so he did a musical adventure in Siberia in 1996. And he developed, we can see there, one of these microphones. So it was very much a directional and a cardioid microphone together that he then filmed with a Sony DV camera. And so I think, yeah, the sound experience is, I think, you know, super important, especially in the VR world. And I mean, there's also, of course, the representation element of VR. I'm not saying that this is not important to consider. You know, when there has been some groundbreaking work has been done by the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where they very much did a study and found out that VR really works as a tool to create this empathic engagement. So it was 180 people were shown 360-degree videos or text articles, and that study really demonstrated that people that could recall the VR elements, the 360 videos better, and had a higher, you know, response to, like a higher empathetic response to these things than just looking at the text or looking at a picture. And they also sort of looked into like a political or social actions that these things can take. And so, yeah, I think that is like, you know, in a way, some really great work that sort of, you know, says that VR is working in that respect. And some takeaways where they were like saying it's quite important to have like you know, one voice over or one protagonist embracing that journey with you, so that you can build some trust. And again, that's, you know, it's a strategy that a lot of documentary filmmakers have been working with. And of course, the other thing that I found really interesting is the Google News Labs, where they sort of say that storytelling becomes now story living, and it's not about a beginning, middle, end, but it's more about having initiation and exploration than making sense of that experience. And yeah, so, you know, if I would be at the Games for Change Latin America, you know, with you in person, I probably would run a workshop with you to sort of see, like, you know, let's get some cinematic VR cameras into a room with a few people, and let's just, like Paulo was saying before, let's use a very playful approach and let's experiment and see how we can think about this. And I think the great thing is, if you get different people from different backgrounds together, then, you know, some really great ideas can come out. So like in this workshop that I was running at Swinburne, there was documentary filmmakers, a researcher from the Social Innovation Research Institute, and colleagues from digital advertising technology. So everyone has a very particular idea of what they want from VR and how it can work. And that was just really great to think about bringing these different ideas together. And yeah, I mean, you know, again, some very straightforward ways for rapid prototyping is, you know, working with the cardboard in that respect. I did a bit of writing as well on that space of community engagement and mobile cinematic VR. I probably want to show a little bit more from the Memoryscapes project, so I'm sort of rushing over this, but the key thing here was a project working with Pacific youth in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and there's a very big problem in obesity in the Pacific communities, and it's a very complex social economic you know, issue, really. And a colleague from the School of Public Health at Massey University asked me to create some mobile phone or smartphone films by young people for young people, and they were like, really, they worked. They like, you know, no government communication, no glossy advertisement, nothing, you know, would reach the youth, but content by young people for young people disseminated on their platforms by their peers had a massive impact. And the colleagues developed a leadership program, and then I taught the young people how to film themselves and how to film their sort of, you know, key messages about positive lifestyle changes in relation to health. At the same time, we also thought about embracing 360, and we created some short videos that we really could understand what is the life of a, you know, young Pacific youth, but also pointing at these, you know, options that you've got to make a better health lifestyle. And it was just a very simple project working with 360 cameras. The youth could really put up the cameras, and sometimes you just press play when the memory card is in, and you press stop again, and then we did the editing collaboratively together so that they would learn something about Premiere Pro as well. And that was like one key part of this project. Of course, now with YouTube, you can also have some, understanding of where your viewers, audiences are looking at with these heat maps. There's some fantastic work. And the other thing, which I think is really quite key, is the idea of scale. So last year I was working on a project in rural Victoria, which is for me, quite exciting as someone who has been living like for 4 years in Melbourne. But Victoria is a very big state, and like you can drive for 4 hours and you're still in the state of Victoria, because Australia is a very big country. And that experience of driving 4 hours and seeing the countryside was really difficult to capture, except when you work with a drone, because you can see, as you can see in the picture, that land. And it was just a really different experience. And we filmed with some rural communities, some of their different towns, and we filmed different museum, the Woods Farm and Heritage Museum. We had one town which was a film set for the Flying Doctors, and some sort of local heroes. And also one was the stick shed, so a very specific architectural feature of an old grain silo container, which you can see on the picture there. And the way to capture it in a 360 experience was, you couldn't have done it with a 2D camera, because if you stand in this silo container element, it's so massive. You get these really high wooden sticks, and if you are in a 360 environment, you can then really experience by looking up and understanding that scale. And so I think that is something that VR can really bring into a perspective that you couldn't understand before. And so I think what I would like to do now is just to show some clips from the Memory Scapes project, and to talk about the space of just as an example of imaginative mobile storytelling. And you see my time is sort of coming to an end. The other thing I just really wanted to mention, which of course also is quite exciting, is that there is a few let me actually show it to you. I think you've got some time. So just rush through this, and then I'll show you a clip. The film festival world, I think, has fully embraced VR now. There is no major film festival that wouldn't have a VR, XR component to it. And I think that is like, really fantastic to see. And there's like, lots of great inspiration at these areas. Again, there's a very particular distribution mechanisms now. And of course, this year, like we've talked before, is like VR has also jumped into the spot of some screening platforms. And so there's some, of course, the VR is thinking about Allspace VR, Mozilla Hubs, which is also a way that, you can think about this VR as a meeting space. And again, Mozilla Hubs, you can access this from any smartphone. It's also part of a mobile space. The other thing that really struck me was that the world of experimental, that VR is the world of experimental, and that is part of the mainstream major festivals. So the clear reference here to expanded cinema, if you look at the Venice Film Festival, and they call their VR area expanded. Same for the London Film Festival, they call it London Film Festival Expanded. And I think that is something that from expanded cinema, which now really resonates into the VR world. So experimenting, beyond the sort of traditional understanding of what VR does. Most of the major festivals now, they've jumped onto the Museum of Other Realities. And one thing I also really want to mention, because I'm also, of course, at the Swinburne University, so I teach, and when I call it Cinematic VR Studio. With some colleagues from Australia, we produced a publication from the Journal of Media Practice and Education, which is entitled Immersive Media Practices in the Classroom, Models of Teaching, Research Nexus in an Australia Context. And, I think VR is great because when you start storyboarding, you think about, how do you move your body to create immersive experiences? So you sort of think about rhythm, editing, pacing in a very new way. So my argument would be, even if you only produce one VR project, it makes you think about filmmaking in a very different way. The way you think about framing, the way you think about time and rhythm. And yeah, it's just always lots of fun to work with. This, of course, is a pre-COVID pictures to work in the classroom. At the moment, yeah, we're working with the VRs, the VR headset at home, and we've even produced some 360 videos in Premiere Pro with all 360 cameras. So you can work with VR sequences in a very experimental way. And in experimental screen production, there's some really fantastic work being exhibited every year. And this year we're still working on a Mozilla Hubs exhibition, because normally I think my idea is that VR doesn't really come to you, that you download it as an app or that you download it on YouTube. But I think the key idea is to have it in an exhibition experience. And so it's a really fantastic project. So where you can see on the one picture, you had like one of the students with a jacket there was introducing the experience to you, would tell you about what you would experience. Then you had to lie in the coffin to watch the VR experience. Another one was you had to sit in a tent, and that sort of very much is about like a camping trip that goes kind of wrong type of experience, or like a murder mystery where you in the end had to choose the who you think is a murderer and point at the map in front of you. And so I think these ideas really make us think about VR, that it's not something where you sit on your chair and turn around, but maybe lying is a different, or being immersed in a space. So like sitting in that tent where you can feel the floor. These sort of things I think are really pushing what a great VR experience can be. So I don't think VR works best if you just download something and then engage with it, but if you're actually in an exhibition context. And I really also want to take this time to talk about some fantastic VR projects that are in the making at the moment, which is from my PhD students, which is Augustus Raymond, especially for Games for Change. I think this will be a project to watch. Augustus is producing an XR documentary about the Salako community in Sarawak, Malaysia, and he's capturing rituals that that language, if there's no next generation learning that language and these rituals, there might be like not longer captured, they might be no longer around. So he's capturing these for this community in an XR way, and I think it's a fantastic project that demonstrates how VR can create some quite important social change. James Barrett is producing a really fantastic expanded cinema project exploring motion design beyond the frame and some live interactions. And Delvin Remedios from India is producing parallel narratives in VR, and he's created some really fantastic tools to think about also how a VR narrative is scripted, and you need different tools for scripting VR narratives rather than just thinking about a pen and paper, but thinking about a 360 immersive space to script these. Yeah, and if you're interested in some resources to get started for cinematic VR, if you're on the Adobe Education Exchange, I've got some work there. You can also just flick me an email or tweet me, and then I can invite you so that you can access these resources. Also, I did a talk where I sort of talk about how you get started in Premiere Pro. So again, normally I would do this in a workshop, but that's the next best thing. And I definitely have to mention that at MENA, we've created an area for mobile cinematic VR and 360 video production. So, and there would be no response that you haven't filmed in 2K. We can't show this at our festival. No, it's not about that. It's about what you create with VR. MENA has been going on for 10 years now, and it started in the world of experimental, then it opened up to become everything, but now there's so many smartphone film festivals around the world, around 32, we can be the experimental film festival again. And at the same time, we've got new categories every year, and 2 years ago, we started with mobile cinematic VR and 360 video production. So we're especially interested in first-time filmmakers, emerging filmmakers, to exhibit VR in different forms. So, which is a screening, everyone receives a cardboard, and then a QR code to some more exhibition experiences. And some really great projects that were exhibited in the screening 2 years ago. I mentioned the work from Miriam Ross, really some really experimental surreal work, some conversations about interwoven veganum, ethics, and economics, where you sit in a conversation between two people. Before I Sleep, from the US, from Dawn, was very much a conversation with her inner self on the mirror. Or Eric, who produced a great poetic work where you can see some short animations. And yeah, I think this is really quite important, because if we look at spaces like in South Korea, I haven't been to this one yet, but it's on my list. If we are allowed to travel again one day, it'd be fantastic. We'd love to see the space. The National Science Museum in Gwangju in South Korea, which is that, cave experience. But again, you wouldn't start producing work with a cave experience if you haven't had some experience in cinematic VR. And you probably start with mobile cinematic VR. In Melbourne, there's a space, I hope that opens up again soon, is the Collingwood VR Cinema, which is an independent space, an art space that exhibits VR projects. I think that's like a fantastic experience. I mean, of course, you can go to ACMI, the Australian Centre for Moving Image, but this is an independent run space. And I think that shows, that VR, is part of the independent world as well. And at Swinburne University, my new friends are in the Autonomy Lab, because they have got these sort of VR treadmills, which I think is like really next level. And we take our students every year to the Berlinale, and we managed to arrange 2 visits at the Fraunhofer Institute, where I think we had a look into the future of volumetric video and some great projects being produced there, where you can, yes, capture a person and then animate that person. But again, I think it would be difficult for anyone to jump into this technology. But if you had produced a mobile cinematic VR project before, you would definitely get into the space. The MENA films will be presented as part of the Mobile Studies Congress. It was also the 10th International Mobile Innovation Screening. So if you're interested, there's a on Bitly Mobile SC for Studies Congress 2021. We're interested in papers. This year the theme is Go Mobile, Stay Sustainable. But anything that relates to mobile innovation, mobile creativity, mobile gaming, we'd be more than happy to hear from you. There's some links of me. The easiest way probably to reach me is on Twitter at MaxMobile. Some of my texts are also in academia if you like to read, or you can find some of my work on YouTube. My website, schleser.nz. So yes, that's the German surname that has been hosted in New Zealand for quite some time. Needs some updating. I will now jump into the film Memoryscapes and show you a bit about this. Just want to say, stay safe and stay creative. Okay, let me just do my starting this here, sorry.
Hi, Max. I have 2 questions on YouTube. I can put on the screen for you can see.
Sorry?
Are you listening to me?
If you've got some time, I'll just film a little bit. Show some of those things that I filmed, and then maybe Polo can jump in with the work that's happening at the moment about the sound. So it's not a fine cut yet, but it's coming. Sorry, it's not a fine cut yet, but it's moving quite close to it. And the project for me is really about an old industrial site, and I'm thinking about what happens if nature reclaims the site, which is part of the space. And so I've used these aurora lights as a representation of what would happen if magnetic fields go out of balance, and we sort of think about the industrial past and how these industries used to be so massive, and now we are in a very much that digital space, but the impact of these industries we feel in climate change now, really. And so I'm also exploring so very much this imaginative capacity of VR to create these immersive, really like this sort of experimental abstract experiences. And Paolo and Andre are producing the soundscape for that at the moment. The audio was recorded with a microphone. It's one of these microphones that can be connected to the actual sites. So it's an it was a free field mic and accelerometer.
And you allow me to mention.
Yes, please.
It's been a challenge to develop the soundtrack with considering the location. And as you said during your presentation, as the viewer edits the film in real time in VR, so that's what we are trying to create moods that reflects the environment, and at the same time it can be suitable to those different environments, regardless which direction she or he is facing at. So considering the soundtrack challenge in VR development, I must say it's been quite interesting to produce something like that. Not only to create the atmospheres that reflects you as the creator decided which path go on, but also create a proper environment for each scene or each capsule or each environment itself. So if you allow me to say that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably been if it would have been a normal year, the project would have been finished. But I think there's no rush with this, and yeah, maybe next year you can have a final version in Sao Paulo. Yeah, I'm sure. So I need to do a bit of keying out some of the tripods to sort of create take the representation to make it more imaginative. And then I think it's really fantastic to work with you, Paolo, because I think the sort of interactions of the colors, the auras, and the sounds already from the sound racks that we have, we can really see. And yeah, it doesn't work on the flat screen, I think, but if you are in the environment, and I think it's sort of the VR, I think, is quite special, which is similar to a cinematic world. You sit in a dark space in a cinema normally, and you are like immersed by the story world, and that's what you do. And I think this is 20 minutes where you do something as well. It starts quite slow, but then becomes quite overpowering. Not overpowering, but it becomes quite engaging to a point where it might be like overpowering to think about what climate change really means for you. And then when you go out of this experience, I think might make you think about this world in a slightly different way, and taking that experience into your everyday life. That's sort of the way we work. And I think sound is such a key part. So I'm very happy to have found to reconnect it rather, with some mobile, passionate producers that understand the way that the conceptual angle of this project is really something that started in the world of mobile filmmaking.
Yes, and of course, needless to say, it's more than proper time to focus on projects that reclaims nature, as your project really states in a very strong and a positive way. So I'm really happy to be involved with projects that take the lead into this in so much emergency environmental crisis that we are facing.
And yeah, so I can say from the it would be great. Just give us a few more months, and yes. Maybe we can present
almost there.
Yeah, we can present it next year. And I think if there's a chance that you have got Games for Change Latin America in Sao Paulo running again, I think it would be something where you not just go and put the VR headset on, but there would be a little bit extra to it. And I think that could be of course, an audiovisual experience where there's probably some kind of a projection that you sort of see things before, and that maybe the temperature in the room is changing quite drastically. These sort of things, I think, will make this project even more immersive. So, and I mean, that could be putting up a fan somewhere that, you know, someone brings to the exhibition space and just starts a fan while you haven't seen it and then takes it away again, and then putting a heater up there. So I think really small things that engage in the way that the auras are taking over, I think would be like, I think that's the way I envision it to be exhibited. So if anyone at Games for Change Latin America is interested, you know, just, you know, let's stay in touch about this.
Yeah. Max, thank you very much for all your. I mean, it's more than a lecture. It's a proper class into VR, right? So it was really nice to have you with us at Games for Change Latin America.
Thank you, obrigado. It was really fun to be part. São Paulo is one of my favorite cities, definitely. So it's like very, very happy to be present, you know, and take part virtually. Like I said before, nothing meets, you know, being in the space with people and discussing. You know, it would be really fantastic to run a workshop that we can really try out different things, you know. And yeah, if there's anyone that is keen from the Games for Change community to talk more about like what can be done with Unity, I think, you know, that would be some really great project that I think also thinking about like the game space and some of the experimental film spaces in that world of expanded VR, I guess, you know, what can happen there. So
exactly.
Yeah, anything to touch base, you know, or like, you know, reconnect in any way. And
perfect. Games for Change do have some chapters in Australia and in Asia, so definitely something for sure is going to happen. And in terms of screening and presenting, so pretty soon, I guess.
Let's keep talking about these things. That's fantastic.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Max. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.